policy, media and technology, markets, advocacy, and the culture of business. Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad.
I think that's where we're at right now, is that people are so angry at being ignored that we're starting to see a real backlash. We're starting to see people care that Dominion is one of their elected's biggest donors. People are starting to care that developers are the biggest donors in local elections. People are starting to care because they're angry at not being listened to.
Gray Montrose, attorney, activist, small batch farmer on Virginia versus data center overreach, utility mega-merging, water, affordable housing, and lots more. Don't miss this one. Watch Full Disclosure on YouTube and listen to us on NPR, Spotify, Apple, and all of the podcatchers. We put them all at one link, fulldradio.com. Again, fulldradio.com. Please subscribe, rate us, tell your girlfriend, mother-in-law, friends, everybody, and catch me on CNN and NPR's Here and Now. Joining us, it is such a pleasure to finally meet you after seeing your Instagram self, is Gray Montrose. She's, of course, a community activist here in Eastern Henrico. She is a small batch, medium batch farmer. She has 3 geese, 14 chickens, 2 turkeys, 3 pigs, 2 goats, multiple cats and dogs. She has a law degree. She ran for Henrico Clerk of the Court in 2023. Do you tap dance? Do you play piano?
I'm trying to play violin. It's not going well.
This is so cool. I say the nefarious Mark Zuckerberg algorithm does its job when it introduces me to someone like you, because I feel like Instagram gets me, right? What is this Gray Montrose? Is this an activist? Is it a journalist? Is this a person running for office? What's so beautiful almost 20 years after the iPhone debuted is someone like you can just stand in front of a data center or an abandoned Kmart on the East End and part kind of, citizen, part lawyer and advocate and everything, and demystify things for an enormous audience. Now, if I asked around and who Gray Montrose is, you almost play a game of telephone and disinformation. People are like, oh, she played rugby and she had an injury and she saw the light and then became a community activist. But that's not exactly it. Tell us how you started.
Well, it really grew out of my campaign for clerk. And I wanted to show folks that the office could be more than just this sort of sleepy position that people didn't really understand. You could keep ticking along the way things had always been, but you could do more. And so I really felt it was important during the campaign to say to folks, hey, here's what we could do. Here's what the law allows us to do. Here's how we could really provide services, and doing exactly as you said, demystifying that office. And when things didn't quite work out, I wanted to carry that forward and say, okay, well, what else is going on in my community that, because of my professional background, I know something about, and I have the research skills to go find out more. How can I sort of talk about what's going on in the community in a way that allows people to be their own activists? Because that's really the whole goal, is I just want to, teach folks to fish, like go out there and be active in the systems that are sometimes it feels like these systems are designed to discourage public participation. We want to encourage public participation.
Now, Gray, and the things we take for granted, I know I sound like an aging over-the-hill Gen Xer, but the smartphone wasn't something that we had forever. It's largely the product of the last 20 years and cheap, ubiquitous broadband, and the ability for you, without having to count on a local news outlet or the Richmond Times-Dispatch or local TV news outlets covering you, to go straight to this great wide open, and for people in the RVA and various hashtags to opt in. Comment on that revelation. I know it's asking you to kind of slow down and explain this, but I think you can't underscore this enough. There are even people who are elected in Congress. AOC has done a masterful job of going past the Democratic establishment and going straight to social media. There's a whole other rail of government and public appeal. One
of the things that really got me feeling like I had to do something was that I heard a story that a local county manager, there was an unflattering piece published about this county manager in the Times-Dispatch. And this county manager went after the reporter. And the way it was described to me is that this person tried to get that reporter fired. And that frustrated me, and it made me feel like our jobs are sometimes things that, we make sacrifices to keep our jobs. We are worried about providing for our family. And so is there somebody out there who might have the freedom to say more, or the freedom to get information to folks in a way that's not going to be constrained by the newspaper shareholders or the public pressure that these public officials are able to bring to bear on folks like reporters? I've heard over and over and over again, phone calls are made. And it's happened to me where phone calls are made, and you just have to bring that stuff into the sunshine. And that's one of the things that I feel really committed to, is just bringing stuff forward, putting it out there, amplifying others' reporting, or potentially trying to say, hey, here's information, let me bring it to you, and then maybe they can amplify this. The whole point is that we're building off each other in a way that keeps everyone a little more independent.
And Gray, you're also armed with that law degree, right? And advocacy, and working with the Richmond Bar and other places to be able to call BS if a big company or somebody tries to flex on you, which normally would intimidate lowly paid journalists or public officials. In a town like this, where the three big towers of corporate influence, let's take the utility, the tobacco company, other players, they more than quietly pull the levers of public affairs. Like, that's been done in various ways, and the money that they give and the in-kind things that they give. But what I think is beautiful is that you're in a position to kind of say, no, I know what my rights are. I know what my runway is. Go away.
Well, yes. And, it's twofold there. Like, one, yes, to be able to say, look, like, here's how this works. Here's where your lines are drawn. Here's where my lines are drawn. Let's all stay in our lanes. But also to be able to untangle some of the procedures and processes. And so really getting into, hey, if you have questions about how local government works, let me use that law degree, that understanding of process, to be able to give you information. Let me point you towards a statute. Hey, this legislator passed a bill that really looks like it does this. Do you want to do something about that? Here's how. And so untangling some of those processes is really what I get excited about in terms of using that law degree.
So zero truth to this kind of drunk history idea of you playing rugby or soccer and then seeing the light. No, I think that's all apocryphal.
Well, it is the tiniest bit true, in the sense that I did have a really bad injury and it made me become a referee. And that is one of the most important experiences I've ever had in my life, is to learn how to be a referee and get into really stressful situations and be able to think and apply the law and maintain good relationships with people, manage other people's stress. That was a really important experience for me, which led me to run for office. So there is the tiniest grain of truth there.
Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad. It's a joy to finally meet, I guess, virtually. This is the closest thing. I'm going to hit you up on that coffee link. Gray Montrose, she's a community activist here in Central Virginia in the Henrico, Richmond area. She's called out all sorts of abuse and overreach on data centers, on public aesthetics. I would like to say that you had me, Gray Montrose, at Kmart, and I'm going to cue this up in a minute. This call out that you did on a long abandoned Kmart, I believe in East Henrico, where you always take these things for granted as a citizen. Like, why is there blight? Why is it? I called it in the financial crisis. There was a popular term called private profits and socialized risk. In this case, it's private profits and kind of socialized public safety aesthetics. Like, we have to pick up the tab long after Kmart or a real estate investment trust or others, profited from that thing. And in this case, you and it went hugely viral. You explained very clearly how they continue to profit. Let me cue it up.
I'm here at the abandoned Kmart on 9 Mile Road in Eastern Henrico. This Kmart opened in 1974 and closed about 25 years later. And it's just been sitting here ever since. Plywood door, broken windows, surrounded by a huge, baking asphalt parking lot. Why is this like this? It's because we set up our systems to encourage this. Henrico County makes more money off of this in taxes than they would off of a field or a farm or a forest. The company that owns this gets to sit back and write it off their taxes as a depreciating asset. Everyone, except for the people that live here, says, yeah, this is better than trees. We need to change some of these structures, because right now, all it does is incentivize bulldozing more green fields, which we know we need, because otherwise it gets real hot, it gets real polluting, people can't breathe, a lot of public health issues. And then we have eyesores like this sitting in the middle of our community. There are lots of reasons to fix this. But all the structures are set up to say this is better than trees.
We were listening to that great explainer that I saw on Instagram on this abandoned Kmart. I mean, decades since abandoned Kmart. There might be one or two left in the country, and it's like a tree falling in the forest. Nobody else would call that out. Too much in this country do you expect that that is a societal problem. Explain how that came to you. Explain how you had the courage of your convictions to demystify that from a commercial property, from a depreciation, from a various inside baseball thing that you would never imagine would go viral on Instagram.
Sure. And this is actually one of the pieces that taught me a lot, because it's something where I got a fact wrong, and I was able to work with the community to come up with the right information. And I was able to put my hand up and say, actually, it was only abandoned for about a decade, not quite as long as I had originally thought. But that was actually really great in terms of community building, to bring people to say, hey, great, like, can we work together on finding the right answer? And so that was wonderful. And I really appreciated that. But also because it's down the street from where I live. There's an abandoned Kmart and there's an abandoned Walgreens. And this was on a dairy farm that was redeveloped in the 1960s. It was supposed to be this beacon of prosperity. And now there's abandoned buildings on 2, if not 3 corners. And that's really frustrating to the community. And we keep hearing from our elected officials, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. We can't force this. And I'm like, wait a second. There are things you can do. There are things you have done where you want to. And that's kind of what made me feel frustrated about it, is that this is a building where the county code is not being enforced regularly. There are broken windows, there's plywood on the doors, there's code violations left, right, and center. If you wanted to enforce that code the same way you do against every resident in the county who's ever had a drive-by by county inspections and gotten a ticket for grass that's too tall or anything else, if you were enforcing against businesses in the same way that you go after citizens, this thing would look a lot different. And that's what felt the most important to me, is to amplify, hey, are we playing by different rules for businesses that we're not doing for our residents and our community members?
And I was thinking just this very concept as I was taking a long delayed Amtrak back from Manhattan 2 nights ago, and looking on the Northeast corridor and everything going down. You just take for granted these brownfields and these abandoned factories and the abandonment of the 1920s and 1930s and 1940s, as we know factories left. But whose responsibility is that, right? After the quote unquote useful life, which is a commercial real estate and accounting concept of a place, is that just left for, in terms of environmental mitigation and the rust and public safety and vandalism and everything for the public? Sometimes it's called an externality, which I think is incorrect, right? This deliberately short shrifts the responsibility of the original property owner. I know this gets into the weeds, but that's what you're really good at doing that. Why should I be indignant about that? I would not have known that the depreciation on a long abandoned Kmart, for example, is still an active asset to, even though this property has been defunct for more than a decade.
So it kind of gets back to this idea that we are paying a lot of times companies to not only come here, but then we're giving up any reason for them to stay here in a system that incentivizes moving on to greener pastures. And that's what you're talking about when we're saying, like, we think about greenfield development. We're building new because it's cost efficient to build new. We haven't set up our systems of building such that it makes financial sense to do rehabilitations. This is something I talk about with union labor a lot, where right now it's a race to the bottom in terms of labor quality because greenfield development is set up to be so easy. But if we want to do rehabilitations of existing sites, that's where skilled labor really comes in, and it makes a difference to your bottom line. But folks aren't willing to do that as long as it's still easy to do that greenfield development on new land. And that's kind of what happens, is that you see cities, you see localities sort of ever expanding outward until it becomes cost effective to look back inward. And when does that happen? Well, it tends to take a certain population density, which just doesn't exist in suburban areas like Eastern Henrico.
Okay, but there is, I'm really not making up an excuse here. There is more than a theoretical value to that greenfield land right now. You think about the some of the old growth, some of the timber, which is kind of euphemistically used as a sink for carbon, as a soil for regenerative farmers. We've had other people on before who said it actually now, if you think about the Nature Conservancy and easements and various other things, it makes more sense for me to hold on to this land and not bring the plows and the bulldozers and the like. And it should incent, as you were saying, for people to go and tear apart old places like the Azalea Mall, which have been disrupted decades ago and are just sitting there in blight. There should very clearly be an incentive structure to tap the latter and not the former.
Yeah, and it's systemic, right? Like we've set up our systems, even at the environmental level, where these are the folks that are supposed to be protecting the environment. And essentially, a lot of these systems treat it as you cut down a forest, it's just like giving the earth a haircut, it'll grow back, no big deal. Or maybe it doesn't grow back and still no big deal because we're not valuing that. We think about water. We're having a huge issue with a lot of these data centers that are saying, I'm going to take water from this place. I'm going to put it back in this place. I'm going to bulldoze these wetlands. I might create some over here. I might buy some wetlands credits. And it's very transactional. But what we're not thinking about is the immediate impacts to communities that need cleaner air. They need shade. One of the facts that I talk about a lot is that there's evidence to indicate that if Verina was not as green as it is, temperatures in Richmond City could go up 5 degrees. And that would be incredibly damaging to a lot of folks who really struggle to access healthcare or access shade, access cooling. As our power bills are going up, that makes a difference. But it's just that we've set up our systems not to value that green space. And you really see that in the housing discussion, where folks are saying, okay, we need density, we need density, we need density. And we're trying to figure out how to incorporate green space into that equation because we need clean air to breathe. We need clean water. We need these things.
So that is a public good, right? And it's very hard. It's very easy for some people to move off into the greener areas. But then when you have a heat wave, everybody has to deal with it. I'm reminded of Scott's Addition, the hottest urban pedestrian restaurant brewery area in the city, which was an afterthought 15 years ago. But it is legitimately hotter than other parts of the city because there are no swales. There's no green space. It's a success in terms of brownfield development and places that were not really well utilized, suddenly catching a whole new lust for life and developers coming there. But it shows you also the perils of not having green, not having trees, not having grassy space, not having sinks for the water.
Exactly. And one folks don't think about is Carytown. Carytown's actually extremely hot. And it's part of, again, that sort of 1960s, 1970s development where concrete is best and the more, the better.
Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad. Again, we're joined by Gray Montrose. It's a blast for me to meet someone over Instagram. You see the persona and what shows up. You're very adept at taking a phone and you look at it like you've got this Zoolander look, like we are here at the data center. Like you're surrounded by fig bushes and everything. It's like, does anybody know what happened to this data center? It's so great. It takes you in like, I want to know more. Tell me about CSX. Tell me about the diesel fire generator. This is really not a normal feedstock for Instagram, but you've made it interesting and your Instagram has taken off. I want to get into that concept of data centers because in my world, in the parlance of Wall Street, you have these hyperscalers, right? There are these companies, massive multinationals, Microsoft, Facebook, Meta, Google, Amazon, Elon Musk's company, NVIDIA, and the others are part of this ecosystem of spending trillions and trillions of dollars in this AI arms race, which has brought it back centrally to Virginia, which used to nominally Northern Virginia was the high-speed internet capital of the hemisphere. But pretty much recently, over the last 4 years, we've noticed, I was up in Chantilly, I was up in Northern Virginia, here you're seeing it in Henrico, these enormous warehouses going up that are enormously power intensive. You wouldn't think kind of where new economy and old economy meet, but to run these things, to run these tokens, to run these equations, you need to burn massive amounts of ostensibly fossil fuel. Explain that.
Sure. So basically, data centers are set up to either be extremely energy hungry or extremely water hungry. Now, we've moved away from water hungry using that water cooling, but a lot of times they're moving to air cooling, which means that it's going to be far more energy intensive. Even some of the less intense water uses are still very energy intensive. So that's because energy is cheap. We have made energy cheap. We have made it very cheap to have a data center in Virginia between the tax breaks and the cheap energy. So it's a great deal for them. But what it's turning out to be is a really bad deal for Virginians because of the way that our utility works. Our utility basically has to serve everyone. And that's a loophole that data centers are taking advantage of. They're saying, we're in the queue, you have to hook us up, you have to serve us. And that's been one big argument from activists is like, yes, true, but not right now. We don't have to serve you immediately. And whether that argument holds weight, I don't know. But that's one argument to say, look, guys, like, yes, we have to serve you, but we have to understand the impacts to everyone else's bill. And we're seeing, like announced last week, 25% increases in fuel charges, increases in base rates, people complaining about power bills that are hundreds of dollars more. And that's because the huge energy demands of these data centers are basically being served by a utility designed to actually have less need. We have actually put our system in place to say, okay, we're going to invest in renewables. We're going to see that residential demand go down. We're going to invest in these technologies. And then the data centers came in and just wrecked the equation.
All while climate change is worsening. We had some horrifically hot days where you could fry an egg or a fish on the sidewalk, and everybody is trying to tax peak demand even more and more and more. And while the data centers are sucking ever more real time on this, it's really a battle for kilowatts, right? It's a tug of war. It's very zero sum.
Exactly. And there's sort of two looming problems. One is the one we've already seen, where we have energy issues and the utilities are having to buy fuel, which is that fossil fuel that you mentioned. But another is that we're starting to see a pattern, which again, it'll play out, but we're starting to see a pattern of data centers not getting as much favorable treatment if they want to hook up to the electric grid. But data centers that plan to tap into gas lines seem to be getting a much more favorable treatment. And we've also seen data centers sort of quietly switching some
Would
of those.
you explain that if they tap into gas lines to run their own gas generators adjacent to the data center?
Correct. So we've seen that, like, for example, the Bank of America installation on Villa Park Drive here in Henrico sort of quietly switched some of their diesel generators, which provide backup, supposedly emergency power, to the data center. The data centers have been sort of given information by the utility that if they're drawing enough power and the grid is in trouble, that they can switch to these emergency generators. That's what's declared an emergency. And these emergencies are happening more and more and more often. And so that diesel fuel is expensive. It makes sense for many reasons, including lowered emissions potentially, to switch to gas. However, that potentially creates basically a gas power plant in people's backyards where they never expected it and they were told these are only emergency generators. It also opens the door for this idea of bring your own power, which is potentially just tapping into a gas line and running gas turbines, which has already been approved for, I believe, one installation in Northern Virginia here. We've seen huge problems in other places with, for example, Memphis, Elon Musk's installation, causing a lot of emissions problems in the surrounding communities, which tend to be communities that don't have a ton of resources to fight back. In Northern Virginia, that's been a very different story. But here in Henrico and other localities like Charles City and Cumberland, we're seeing these gas installations go up in communities that already have a lot of burdens.
So this is still very much a vestige of what we would see in the early 20th century and the 19th century. People lived north of the river and south of the river, and incinerators, and when trash was burnt, or combined outflow sewers in the poorest parts of town, or medical incinerators. There's always been a tradition, and I think broadly it's called environmental justice, but sloughing these things onto more vulnerable communities. There's an arbitrage in the United States where, car makers and other manufacturers and the natural gas industry could go into the South where environmental regulations or clean air and clean water regulations are watered down. We saw it with the fracking controversy and the various documentaries that came out of it. And also here, this perception that if you do it in an area and it's quiet and you might hear a hum at night, and nat gas is nominally clean burning, that no one is really affected or worse for the wear.
Yeah, and that again comes back to a systemic issue, which is that we think about things like the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, the NACs, that we're thinking about issuing our air quality permits based on national standards and ambient air for huge areas. It's not really thinking about spot impacts to the communities. And that was one of the things that we thought we had been on the right track with here in Virginia. In the Fourth Circuit decision, Friends of Buckingham was the first time that a court mandated DEQ consider environmental justice. But as always, there's a loophole. So in Henrico County, what we have seen is the county granting approval for what they call site suitability, basically saying you can put it here. It's a rezoning decision. We approve this site, which basically ties DEQ's hands in terms of considering environmental justice, because the county, who's supposed to be the boots on the ground, has already approved the site. DEQ cannot substitute their judgment as far as site suitability. And so these are the kinds of loopholes we're talking about. There was a bill passed a year or two ago by a local Henrico state senator that basically included, it was meant as a housing bill, it was portrayed as a housing bill to say we need to push through residential developments, but they also included commercial in the definition in such a way that basically any development, as long as the zoning is already in place, you can't say no to a plan of development. And that's a little bit technical, but it really means that there's less and less a locality can do to stop development, even if it's harmful. So in the case of data centers, there was this light manufacturing idea that it was going to be completely contained in a building, even though they didn't really count generator yards, these huge generator yards, as part of that contained
But
in a
great,
building.
if you zoom out, is there something to be said about a super confidence at the corporate and municipal level? Because if this percolates up to a state Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court clearly would side on the side of development and developers, right? Every precedent has shown, like in watering down clear air and clear water, you're fighting the good fight, but it's increasingly hard to imagine if they take this, if they call your bluff, if they take it to the nth degree, if you call out Department of Environmental Quality, if you sue, if you do all these things, if you run a public advocacy, message. You saw what happened, with in the Spanberger campaign and everything else that emanated. The Supreme Court, this Supreme Court has shot down precisely this kind of backlash.
Well, but it's getting stronger. I think that's where we're at right now, is that people are so angry at being ignored that we're starting to see a real backlash. We're starting to see people care that Dominion is one of their elected's biggest donors. People are starting to care that developers are the biggest donors in local elections. People are starting to care because they're angry at not being listened to.
Full disclosure, please do stay with us. This show airs on NPR, Spotify, Apple, all the fine podcatchers, and of course, watch us on YouTube and on Gray Montrose's very frequented Instagram channel. You can find me on all the socials. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram as well. I bet you I still have a MySpace and Friendster handle somewhere. I put them all at one neat link for you, fulldradio.com. Again, fulldradio.com. We are across the great Commonwealth of Virginia on Radio IQ, WVTF. You could catch us in Asheville, North Carolina on WPVM, and out west in Ventura, California. Holler if you too would like us on your air. My DMs, alas, are always open. And catch me every week on both NPR's Here and Now and CNN. If you're just joining us, my esteemed guest is Gray Montrose. She is a community activist here in Central Virginia, calling out data center overreach, environmental injustices, demystifying all these great things for me on Instagram, where I found you. And I'm largely meeting you in quasi-person right now, which is a great treat. I have to say that you really did your job in explaining things out there, because you have a growing, passionate following. I mean, I just teased this up out there that I'm going to have Gray Montrose on the show, and the Instagram went nuts. I mean, you Gen Alphas, I don't know what you're doing anything, but I'm just an old man. But anyway, I digress. You're also a passionate farmer. You have 3 geese, 14 chickens, 2 turkeys, 3 pigs, 2 goats, and there is a nexus of farming property and the data center overbuild right now. I have to ask you, Dominion, big power, big coal ash here in Richmond, Virginia, is in the process of being acquired by the parent of Florida Power and Light. Somebody must see something at play there that either they have to bone up and arm up for a big regulatory backlash, or that there might be purchasing economies for nat gas and other things. Florida Power and Light is a big deal, and coming here and buying a company that was very profitable and doing really well because data centers are going up and down Virginia. What is the play there, and what is the possible subterfuge?
Well, getting above my pay grade, but I think, and this is my speculation, that actually Dominion was a little bit more attractive to them because of the data centers and because of the struggles Dominion has had to deal with those data centers. So bigger purchasing power, as you identify, I think is a very pertinent issue to this situation. But also, Dominion has worked hard to invest in renewables because, quite simply, they get paid extra to build stuff. And so they don't mind investing in renewables because they can just charge us, the ratepayers.
But do they? I mean, if they had their druthers, wouldn't they depreciate the heck out of an old, I mean, coal-fired might not be economic anymore, but nuclear, whatever else is in their portfolio, they're incented, as you explained with your depreciation in Kmart episode, they are incented to spread that out as long as possible and milk the hell out of it.
Oh yeah, North Anna, Exhibit A, right? How long
North Anna nuclear
third reactor?
Yeah.
Yeah. The third reactor that we've never seen, that we've been paying for 10 years. Yeah, but it's at the same time, there is still a lot of, in terms of incentives, there's still a lot out there for renewables. And Dominion did, among other very clever things. I always say to people, Dominion hires smart people and they pay them a lot of money to do smart things. Dominion created the only U.S. flagged barge to move wind turbine parts up and down the coast, which at the time and still is, except for a certain person's antipathy to wind turbines, that's a smart bet because you have to use a U.S. flagged ship to do a lot of the construction work because of federal law. And so Dominion makes smart bets, and they've done a lot on renewables. So while it's not been great for Virginia ratepayers for many reasons, it could be a very smart investment for Florida Power and Light. However, I'm going to say right now, it would be a bad deal for Virginians. They have a terrible reputation, and I think it would just decentralize even further the issues that Virginians are facing in terms of high power bills.
How is this backlash coming up on ballots? We have midterm elections. We have clearly, you've been following what's happened with the Democratic Socialists of America and the center of gravity, Mamdani in New York, and all these people are seated. The data center issue is not as big in densely urban areas as are other elements of kind of, healthcare costs, Medicare for all, grocery, housing, talking about the conflicts in the Middle East. But as you go out into the heartland and as you go out into areas with more green space, this has become a very pungent us versus them, us versus big money that can just capture and buy whatever it wants. To what extent has that latched onto the kind of the political momentum of the time?
I think it's coming around to both sides. This is a very bipartisan issue. And I think one of the big catalysts here in Virginia was that we had a big sort of quite literal gold rush when it came to solar. Everybody was all in on solar. But we got a ton of bad actors because of the way that the process was rushed. It was pushed through. There was what they call a permit by rule, where you kind of automatically got permits if you followed the right set of rules. And so we got a ton of bad actors that were just stripping topsoil and polluting streams and behaving badly in communities to basically be speculators on solar energy investment. We saw that happen in Virginia. We're now seeing it happen with data centers where communities, leaders are not listening and they're just ramming through another shiny toy. And this is happening to where we're starting to see legislators get ousted. We're starting to see a lot of pressure brought to bear to not take that corporate money. And we're hearing calls from even our lieutenant governor to slow down the process and be very considered in what we do. So we don't have these bad actors. She's called actively to say, hey, we need to slow down this merger with Dominion and NextEra.
What is the spark? What is the kind of return idea at the very ground level? Just sketch this out for me. Big data centers come in here. They're armed with massive market capitalizations, a Microsoft, a Google. Again, money is no object when you have hundreds of billions of dollars on your balance sheet, multiple trillions of dollars of market capitalization. That's very new to the time. And we are in a capital spending cycle, the likes of which have never been seen before. Even if you adjust railroads and internet for inflation and the Industrial Revolution, nothing like this. So you show up at a town with a lot of green space and say, we're going to build this. We could turn around and build it. Is it the tax revenue? I mean, because these are not labor intensive places. It's not like they're going to be hiring 4,000 people. It's not even like a Buc-ee's.
Yeah. And, that's always been the argument, right? It's jobs, 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 right? And we are getting to the point where that's just a fiction we can't entertain anymore. But what these localities are really turning on is revenue, full stop. I've actually heard a county official say data centers don't go to school. And that's the big problem, is that so many Virginia localities in particular are struggling with schools funding and funding for basic services. We are seeing locality after locality in Virginia fall like dominoes because they can't pay their bills. And it's part of this cycle of, hey, all of a sudden in the late 1960s, early 1970s, we have to start providing services to everyone. And then there's a level of expectation for what those services are that is far outweighing the actual ability. So if you think about residential development, it might cost 2 to 10 times in services what it ever pays in property taxes. But this idea was cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes, bring people here. That economic growth will generate enough to pay future bills. But we're figuring out 40 years later that it's not covering the bills. So we have so many localities in Virginia that are struggling with their financial picture. They're running out of room after years of sprawl development. And so they're looking for free money. And that's what I hear over and over and over again about data centers. It's free money.
That infusion would come in and this stuff is built. They bring in the best developers. It's expedited. I think a few things like, if you go up to, Spotsylvania and that water park that's being built, it's incredible how quickly some of these things can turn around. And with data centers, and I also think with Amazon fulfillment centers, it's unbelievable. You drive up on 95 and you see how many of these just popped up, because that money, that is serious money. That is money that can afford serious billable hours, litigation, some of the best contractors, raw materials. There's no bottleneck here. And as you say, there are municipalities that would love any sort of windfall.
Sure. And the other part of that is that there's nothing to make them stay. We've seen for years with stadiums, for example, that they just leave or they extract even more to make them stay. And so it's always, always, always going to be a bad deal. There's nothing to keep them there. And the big trigger that you see with all these data center developments is that there's no decommissioning plan. There's no plan for if the industry falls apart, the market collapses, what are you left with? And so, exactly as you said, you see these brownfields, you see these abandoned buildings. And how did that happen? Because there's really nothing to make these industries stay. They build, they do what they need to do, they leave. It's like the seagull analogy.
Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad. We're joined by community activist Gray Montrose. She lives and farms in eastern Henrico, where she has multiple geese, chickens, turkeys, pigs. Is it true that we've only recently had the hawk phenomenon in Richmond? My father-in-law says he didn't see them growing up, but they are chicken hawks and they love to feast on chickens. And you see them everywhere pursuing precisely the little chicks that you raise.
Our bigger problem is coyotes and foxes.
Really?
Urban wildlife, man. It's everywhere.
Did you hear about that mangy coyote in Willow Lawn? I think that it happened during the pandemic. Some strange things out there. We have weird things happen here. We had the raccoon that broke into the liquor store. Lots of things. I won't bore you with them. But let's talk about hard transition here. Housing. Housing is one of the great big dilemmas of our generation right now. I'm old enough, Gray, to remember covering the financial crisis in 2008 to 2010, that there were enough abandoned, half-finished things in the exurbs of Tucson that coyotes and bobcats took them over, and people were ripping out the copper pipes. And Wall Street could not wait to separate these toxic assets off their books. Meanwhile, the pandemic happened, mortgages fall to near an all-time low for a long-term mortgage, and there is a huge generational backup. Boomers are hanging on to their homes and their mortgages ever longer. And there's a huge paucity of affordable housing. And everybody who runs for office pays lip service to this. And we need to do this, and we need to do this, and we need to do that. But in the end, it's the commercial impulse that can get a place torn down or a place rezoned. And it's largely not for affordable housing. Comment on that.
Sure. So there's a lot going on with housing. And it's a huge problem with many, many, many systemic things going on that make it really hard to untangle. And so when we're talking about housing and we're thinking about green spaces and we're thinking about competing uses, it's important to think about communities. What does a community need? And that's always the argument for commercial development. It's like, oh, jobs and economic growth. Well, that requires people to spend money, which requires them to have disposable income that they're not spending on rent or otherwise on housing. And so these things are all very interconnected. And one of the things that we have seen in particular with regard to incentivizing industry is that it brings short-term gains and short-term benefits, but it's so hard to hang on to. And it requires a certain level of momentum that isn't sustainable. So when we invest in communities and we're thinking very critically about the interplay of, yes, we need housing and we potentially need a lot more housing, but what does that look like and who's benefiting? And do they have access to the other things that make a community, like gathering spaces and green spaces and places to go get basic services? That's what we're not building in when we're just saying, oh, well, we need a B1 rezoning for a business. What is that business? Is it serving the community? And that's what our local electeds are supposed to be doing, is that critical judgment of like, does this fit here? But our laws have gone so far to making sure all development is good development. It's really hard for them to say no, even when they want to.
You saw during the pandemic all of these borderline luxury high rises that went up in Scott's Addition and on West Broad Street. That was with the system by itself incenting whatever the system did. There's nothing like, New York, where I lived for more than a decade, that's saying if you do put up a luxury doorman building, you have to save 20%, the lower floors, sadly, for affordable housing. Here, it's money chasing money. It's real estate investment trusts. It's people seeking cash on cash returns. There isn't an invisible or actual hand of the municipality saying, if I'm going to be okay with zoning this area for luxury high rises, we need to set aside or tithe this amount to incent affordable housing. I don't even know what affordable housing is anymore.
Well, but see, I think there is an invisible hand, and that is this idea of butts and seats, because this whole idea of commuters and commuting and offices, that is an invisible hand because it is a constraint geographically. It says you have to be within driving distance of your job and all the systems that support being within driving distance of a job. And there are many reasons for that. There's information that indicates that a lot of mid-size American banks are really over leveraged on commercial real estate. Everybody thought we'd always need offices, but we don't. And so looking hard at what remote work looks like, as like you and I are communicating right now remotely, we can do this. What does that look like, and how does that transform communities? How does that stop the bleed from our rural communities into our denser areas? Yes, we need density. We love density, but what's there? And part of the complicating factor is it's really hard to make an office building into a residential space. So
as we see in New York with the Pfizer Tower right now.
Yes. Yeah. So how to do this? I think the invisible hand is really this investment in the old style of you must report to an office, you must report to work. Henrico County quite literally has a financial incentive program for commute-worthy offices. And I'm like, is this 2000? I don't know.
Yeah, you do have these old abandoned big, Circuit City headquarters that they're trying to repurpose into Class A space and whatnot. And then I also think, dead malls, Gray. I mean, for the longest times, the depreciation benefits of it, or you can put up as many Jimmy John's and Starbucks and Valvolines in the parking lot. But I think about affordable housing, like what is so precious about that thing that it can't be repurposed into kind of a mixed use affordable housing place with a grocery store that's affordable by people? Or am I being too idealistic? Does it again go back to the impulse at the city council level, at the tax coffer level, that if you have a developer come in with big bucks, you got to take that money?
Well, part of the problem is that so much of what's being built and has been built in the last 20, 30, 40 years isn't modular. So you think about the strip mall, or you think about the trailer park. Those are things that sometimes have negative connotations, but there's parts of it that actually work really well. All kinds of businesses can go into a strip mall. It's a great engine for small businesses to get started. And when you're building these big new bespoke developments, that's one of the things that we've seen is that the rents are necessarily so high. They're calculated in the financing for that building to be so high that it's really hard to not have the chain stores, the Jimmy John's, the Starbucks. And these things are designed in such a way between the financing structure and the physical structure of the building that it makes it really hard to do the sort of reuse that you need to have this sorts of things be repurposed in a community as needs change, as the communities change. That's one of the big concerns with data centers. They're just windowless boxes. What are you going to do with that if the industry goes away?
Gray Montrose, does this count as a billable hour? I mean, you're an attorney. You have a very high bougie, lavalier mic, everything. It looks like we're in a deposition. Gosh, I'm hitting myself for not pushing you to film this in front of a fig bush, in front of a CSX rail yard or something. But no, what I like about you, I have to say, break the wall on this, that this is very non-hydrogenated. This is very pure. This is, taking out the aesthetics and everything and just being purely 100% Gray Montrose. In the few minutes we have left, I'd love to, throw up a jump ball on mass transit in this area. And it's a lightning rod now in New York with the mayor talking about free trains and the like. As I said, when we had the former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg on our live show back at the end of 2023, how many people would know that Richmond Staples Mill station is the busiest by far in the South?
You'd never know.
And if you walk in there, my lament is always like, if you walk in there, it feels like 1973 East Germany. And there is this might get inside baseball, but you have brought up CSX before. CSX, which has a Richmond tradition, right, is openly hostile to passenger rail. There is a deference. If you take the Northeast Corridor trains, if you take any trains, they get throttled because of CSX. What would happen to this entire area if it was really, truly espousing kind of being an Amtrak terminus? You see the gorgeous ceremonial station downtown, which is great for weddings and bar mitzvahs. I don't know how many trains actually go out of it. If you really truly prioritized train travel, if you could have really truly easy access to DC, we don't even have a leg that takes us to Charlottesville, a sister city here. Have you ever pondered that?
Oh, I would love it so much. I am so excited about improving rail traffic here because it really just takes cars off the road, right? It reduces our dependence on cars. It brings us into those bigger markets. It makes things walkable. That would be amazing. But again, we have to be so careful about the spot impacts, and we have to think about where we are in these communities. If you look at the community around that Staples Mill station, is that a community that might really benefit from an upgraded station where it has amenities, that has coffee, for heaven's sake? That's a community that maybe that's a real opportunity there. If you look at the rail yard that they're expanding in Eastern Henrico, that's maybe adding another burden. So what does it look like to think about the greater good of, yes, we need transit. Transit would be incredible. We need to take cars off the road from a public health standpoint, if nothing else. But at the same time, we have to be very considerate of what it looks like for these communities. Another thing that a lot of our rail lines are really hostile to is trail development. They're really hostile to that. They don't want people around these rail tracks, and that's reasonable. But we need to work together to make those sorts of non-car options more available.
I got to move you to water because it's a perennial issue in this town. We've had Mayor Avula on the show. We've had LeVar Stoney and other people. There was a water crisis this time last year where the city really, you realized that certain elements were very fragile, and it spilled over into Henrico, water pressure. We couldn't do a live show at the Historical Society in the Museum District if there was enough water pressure for the fire marshal to say it was okay. But I'm specifically thinking about combined outflows in a city of this prestige that's growing so much. So little rainfall causes the system to cry uncle and spew all of this raw sewage into downtown James River. That's something
into my backyard.
Into your back.
The septic field for one of them is practically in my backyard.
which destroys. I mean, it's a beautiful place. You have wonderful bike trails. You have historic, centuries-old trails and everything, and yet a system that is more redolent of kind of the Thames River in the 1500s. Talk about that. Talk about how daunting it is to raise the bonds to kind of do that, to make something as beautiful as the James River inviolate.
Sure. It's really hard, especially in these historic cities, because you have to do so much disruption to fix it. And that's hard. Like, we've been in a situation in Eastern Henrico where a lot of our access roads into the city have been closed for years. And that's really frustrating to people who need to be able to get in and out of the city. But it's the disruption for things like sewer pipe replacement. It takes a lot to undo the mistakes of the past, which is one reason I really try hard to educate folks on, hey, are we making a good decision going forward? Because it takes so much to undo what we thought was a great idea 50 years ago.
You can't have a world-class city without a world-class sewage treatment system, right? Even New York into the mid 80s was spewing raw sewage into the Hudson River. And it's a major problem here. Like a quarter inch of rain taxes the system. And you have beautiful trails. I mean, up by me and, where you went to high school, Pony Pasture and the like, you have to look askance at that beautiful views. Or if I go down by the flood wall and see eagles and ospreys and the other, it's with a big asterisk on it because I know raw sewage is only rainfall away.
It's true. But then again, you look at the bigger picture and we have a water colonialism problem in Virginia, where a lot of our localities are saying, okay, I don't want to get it out of the James, especially downstream from Richmond. But where do you go for water? So you start building reservoirs in other localities. And you're saying, okay, locality, I'll pay you $1 million a year. You give me my reservoir. And that sounds like a great deal to a cash-strapped locality where that might be 20% of their budget. And so we have this problem where everybody in the richer counties is saying we can just go to a poor county and take their water resources. And where does that stop? Because it's going to run into a supply problem eventually. So what decisions are we making that it's going to backfire 50 years from now? Henrico has already said their water supply, they're going to need to seek a new water supply by 2050.
And you talk about that colonialism. It brings to mind a 19th and 18th century thing that the smokestacks and chimneys would blow to where the RAF lived, right? The Riff Raff lived. And it's terrible to say that because you cover environmental justice so much. And to think that that's really still the status quo with where the combined sewage outflow is spewed out toward Manchester and Verine and the other place as well. We seek out ever higher ground to get fresh water. It seems like so short-sighted. But Gray Montrose, close us out in the few minutes we have left. What should we be covering? What will you look forward to be covering? We have a big midterm election coming up in this country. We have clearly activism. The party seems like it's the Democratic Party seems like it's reconsidering its kind of populist flank, that the things you used to have to say quietly right now you can say out loud. Medicare for all isn't as taboo as it used to be, free bus rides and the like. What is at the cutting edge, at the bleeding edge from your perspective?
The buzzword always used to be jobs. The buzzword used to be economic growth, this idea that economic growth lifts all boats. And people are figuring out that it doesn't. Folks get left behind. Jobs are not a replacement for your health, for your quality of life. And so we're starting to see people say, we deserve quality of life. And I think that's going to be the most important political trend. It's not just this buzzword affordability. It's how do we preserve and protect and increase quality of life for our communities.
So when you get down to brass tacks, what are the most actionable things when you talk to perspectives, when somebody hits you up on the coffee link on your Instagram? What do people say out there? The biggest bottlenecks. We clearly know that what's left of I wouldn't even call it benign neglect of the Affordable Care Act thing. These premiums are soaring, and the administration has been explicitly hostile to this program. Like let it wither on the vine, let it die. So many people are being priced out of healthcare that they thought that they were able to get just 4 or 5 years ago at a semi-affordable price.
Sure. And a job isn't a replacement for healthcare. Economic growth isn't a replacement for healthcare. So what can we do? We can do our best to keep our environment as clean as we possibly can, so they're not breathing in the pollutants. We're not drinking them in our water. Let's take care of our environment. Let's try to take care of our diets. Let's try to take care of what we can, even as we fight for access to healthcare for all. So these are things we can do. And so that's kind of where I come in, as I say, look, like, what is our environment doing for our health and to our health? And that's what I try to bug everybody about, is like, go ask for code to be enforced on businesses. Don't let the polluters drive your local economy. Don't let them be the biggest donors. Let's take care of our environment as one step forward for healthcare.
Gray, are we going to see some small batch goat cheeses from you? Are you going to unleash your pigs on truffles somewhere in Manchester?
I'll send you some eggs. I can do that part.
No, give us some pro tips from the farmer side of you. That's what I love. I could tap the JD person, the farmer, the family person, the activist, the social media guru.
Hey, I mean, that's one of the coolest things that we do. We have pigs, not just because we love pigs, we do. But we use them to clear our forest. When they dig up the invasive species, they tear up all the growth, and then the goats come through and they maintain it. It's much less work that we don't have to do. So like the whole sustainability thing is baked in at our farm.
But you won't lease them out for truffle snuffing.
They probably would just eat them.
Gray Montrose, community activist in East Henrico. She ran for Henrico Clerk of the Court in 2023. Gosh, your Instagram, Montrose RVA, is highly trafficked. Very interesting. I could just spend hours and hours learning things on it. I wouldn't say you're a journalist, you're an activist, you're a watcher, you're a social media guru, a small batch farmer, a JD, a volunteer. Please consider yourself a friend of the show. This was a hoot.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Full disclosure, special thanks to Ian Stewart. If you are listening to us on the radio, note that while we cut for broadcast link, the entirety of every interview is on podcast. We are on the NPR network, Spotify, Apple. Watch us on YouTube. You could find them all at one link, fulldradio.com. Again, fulldradio.com. And please do recommend us to a friend. A shout out to our home station, WVTF Radio IQ, Virginia's NPR news source. DM me to carry us on your air, and catch me every week on both CNN and NPR's Here and Now. I'm Robin Farzad. Thank you for listening. Back with you next week.